The ship did not sink. That is the part nobody wants to talk about. On the night of May 7, 2026, a Ukrainian drone crossed more than 1,000 kilometers of Russian airspace, found a warship sitting off the naval base at Kaspiysk, and struck it. And when the satellite imagery came back 2 weeks later, the hull was still floating. 800 tons of steel riding upright in the water, apparently intact. A lesser story ends there. Russia survives the headline writers move on, and the whole thing gets filed under near miss. The Russian state media certainly preferred that version, reporting at first only that an unidentified target had been intercepted. But look closer at where the drone hit. It did not aim for the waterline. It did not try to break the keel or punch a hole below the surface. It went for the top of the ship, the bridge, the mast, the place where the radar lived, and the place where the officers stood. Whoever planned this strike was not trying to drown the vessel. They were trying to kill what made it a warship at all and leave the empty shell floating as a kind of message. The vessel was a Karakurt-class Corvette, one of the most modern missile platforms Russia owns, built to fire caliber cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities. After May 7th, it was still a ship. It just was not a weapon anymore. And that distinction is the entire reason we are here. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what the Caspian Sea was supposed to be. For most of this war, it was the quiet room. Far to the east of the fighting, ringed by Russia, Iran, and 3 former Soviet republics, the Caspian was the one body of water where Moscow could exhale. No NATO ship had ever sailed it. No American carrier could ever reach it. It was landlocked, sealed, and by Russian design, untouchable. The Caspian flotilla used it as a firing range and a rear base, lobbing cruise missiles into Ukraine from waters that sat beyond the edge of the war. The geography told Russian planners they were safe. The distance told them they were safe. Every map they looked at confirmed the same comfortable fact. Nothing Ukraine flew could fly that far, and nothing Ukraine sailed could ever get there. The Caspian was the back of the house, the place where the inventory was stacked and the lights were left off. There is a deeper reason it felt safe, and it is worth pausing on because it explains the arrogance. The Caspian is not just protected by water and distance, it is protected by law. Back in 2018, the 5 countries that ring the sea, Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, signed a convention at the Kazakh port of Aktau, and one of its core provisions banned the military forces of any outside nation from ever entering. No American fleet, no NATO vessel, not even the transit of foreign military shipments. On paper, it was a shared sea, a model of regional cooperation. In practice, as one analysis put it bluntly, the ban on outside military presence simply locked in the advantage of the country that already had the biggest fleet there, and that country was Russia. Moscow had built itself a fortress and written the rules so that no one from the outside could ever walk in, and Russia kept reinforcing those walls. As recently as October 2025, 4 of the 5 Caspian states signed a fresh security agreement, reaffirming the same principle, tightening the seal, doubling down on the idea that this sea belonged to them and to no one else. They were still bolting the front gate shut. They had simply never imagined the threat would not use the gate at all. So when the war finally arrived there, it did not come the way anyone had imagined. It did not steam in through a strait or breach a blockade. It did not violate the convention because there was no foreign navy and no foreign soldier. It dropped out of a low sky in the dark, a wooden aircraft the size of a small car launched from Ukrainian soil, and it went looking for the one part of the ship that could not be replaced overnight. Here is what the record shows. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the night of May 7th, Ukrainian forces struck a Project 22,800 Karakurt-class small missile ship near the Kaspiysk base in the Republic of Dagestan. Ukrainian officials said openly that the damage was still being assessed, and they released video of the strike at the same moment they announced it. Analysts noted that publishing the footage immediately signaled confidence in the hit even before the full picture was clear. The weapon, according to Ukraine's General Staff, was an FP-1, the long-range one-way attack drone built by the Ukrainian company Firepoint. I want to flag one disagreement in the record here because honesty matters more than a clean story. At least one respected naval outlet attributed the May 7th strike to a shorter-range FP-2 instead. Given that the FP-2's range tops out around 200 kilometers and Kaspiysk sits far beyond that, the FP-1 is the far more likely answer. But you should know the sources are not perfectly aligned, and I would rather tell you that than pretend the picture is cleaner than it is. The distance itself is reported anywhere from 1,000 to over 1,500 kilometers, depending on whether you measure from the nearest front line or from Ukrainian-held territory. Either number puts this strike deep inside what Russia treated as a safe rear in a place no Ukrainian weapon was ever supposed to reach, and it was not a one-off. Reporting from Euromaidan Press, drawing on Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, counted 4 Russian vessels hit in the Caspian during May 2026 alone. The Karakurt on the 7th, a missile ship and a minesweeper on the 15th, and on the 17th, a Project 1041 Svetliak border patrol boat filmed firing its guns at the incoming drone and missing. Then, on May 21st, the open-source intelligence project Exilinova published satellite imagery indicating the Karakurt's superstructure had been destroyed. The superstructure, not the hull. That word is doing all the work. There is one image from this campaign that stays with you. When the drone came for the Svetliak patrol boat on the 17th, the crew saw it. They opened fire with the ship's guns tracer arcing out into the dark at a target the size of a light aircraft closing slow and steady, and they missed. The video published by the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces shows the vessel firing and the drone coming on anyway. That is the new arithmetic of this sea. A warship can see the thing that is about to wreck it, can shoot at it with everything it has and still lose because the thing costs almost nothing, and there is always another one behind it. And this campaign did not begin in May. It began as a series of probes. Ukrainian drones reached the Caspian as far back as late 2024, testing the defenses, hitting cargo vessels and patrol boats learning the route. In November of that year, drones damaged the larger Karakurt-class frigates Tatarstan and Dagestan as they sat alongside at Kaspiysk. In December, Ukrainian forces went after the cargo ships themselves, the ones moving weapons up from Iran. Each strike was a rehearsal. By the spring of 2026, the rehearsals were over, and the targets had moved up the value chain from supply ships to the missile corvettes themselves. And it is worth understanding why those cargo ships mattered in the first place, because it tells you what the Caspian really is to Russia. This is not an empty sea. It is an artery. It is the northern leg of a trade and weapons corridor that runs from Iran straight up to the Russian heartland. Roll-on, roll-off cargo vessels load up at Iranian ports on the southern shore and sail north to Astrakhan and Makhachkala, carrying components for Shahed drones, artillery shells, and missile parts, all of it moving entirely beyond the reach of Western interdiction. There is no Fifth Fleet to stop them because the convention Russia helped write made sure no Western Navy could ever be there. The Caspian is how Iran feeds the war. So when Ukraine pushes into that sea, it is not just hunting warships. It is reaching for the supply line that keeps the drones falling on Kyiv. So let us talk about why you kill the top of a warship instead of the bottom. A Karakurt corvette is 67 meters long and displaces roughly 800 tons. To sink it, you would need to put a large warhead below the waterline and flood enough compartments to drag it under. That is hard. Ships are built to resist exactly that. They have bulkheads, they have pumps, they have damage control crews whose entire job is to keep water out and keep the vessel upright. Sinking a warship at anchor is one of the most difficult things you can ask a single weapon to do. But a warship is not dangerous because it floats. It is dangerous because it can see and it can think. The radar on the mast is how it finds targets and tracks incoming threats. The bridge and the combat information center are where the crew turns sensor data into a firing decision. Take those away and what remains is a hull with missiles it can no longer aim. The caliber launchers are still bolted to the deck. They are just blind now. A loaded gun with the sights torn off and the trigger hand gone. Consider what is actually packed into the top of a vessel like this. The Karakurt was designed to be small but to punch far above its size. It carries a vertical launch system loaded with Kalibr or Onyx cruise missiles weapons that have struck Ukrainian cities and infrastructure for 3 years. But those missiles do not aim themselves. They depend on the ship's sensors to find a target, on the combat information center to assign it, and on the radar to feed the launch with data. All of that lives in the superstructure in the few square meters of antennas and consoles and crew above the main deck. It is the most concentrated, most valuable, and most exposed part of the entire ship. Crack that open, and the 800 tons beneath it become inert, a barge with expensive cargo it can no longer use. This is the logic of the strike. The FP-1 carries a warhead in the range of roughly 100 kilograms according to its own engineers. That is nowhere near enough to sink 800 tons of steel. But it is more than enough to gut a bridge and shred a radar array. So you do not waste it on the armored, redundant, hard-to-kill part of the ship. You spend it on the fragile, irreplaceable, expensive-to-fix part. You do not try to drown the animal. You go for the brain. And think about what that means for repair. A holed hull in some ways is the easier fix. You patch the steel, you pump out the water, you weld. But a destroyed radar, a gutted combat information center, a wrecked fire control suite, those are precision electronics. They are not welded back together. They are reordered often from factories that are themselves under sanction or under strain, and they are reinstalled by specialists, and the whole process takes months. By blinding the ship instead of sinking it, Ukraine may have taken it out of the war for longer than a clean kill would have, and at a fraction of the effort. Now, hold that thought against the price tag, because this is where it stops being a clever tactic and starts being a strategic problem for Russia. A single FP1 costs about $55,000. That figure is consistent across nearly every source. The drone is built largely from plywood and composite propeller-driven, simple enough that Firepoint produces around 200 of them a day across more than 50 scattered sites. That scattering is not an accident. The company spread its production deliberately across dozens of locations precisely so that a single Russian missile could never cripple the supply. Knock out one site and the others keep running. It is a factory built to be bombed and survive. And there is a detail about that company that tells you everything about the nature of this war. Firepoint did not exist when Russia invaded. Its founders were not generals or defense executives. They were, by their own account, a film location scout, an IT entrepreneur, and a man who ran a concrete business. They started building the FP1 in November 2022 with about a dozen people. Today, the company employs roughly 3,700, and by its own account, its drones now account for about 60% of Ukraine's long-range strikes. For comparison, this single $55,000 drone costs roughly a third of what Russia pays to build one Shahed. A Karakurt Corvette costs tens of millions of dollars and takes years to build. The radar and combat systems on top of it cost a fortune and cannot be reordered overnight. So the exchange rate of this single strike is brutal in the most literal economic sense. A wooden aircraft worth less than a used car against the irreplaceable nervous system of a modern warship. And here is the part the engineers got right that the headlines miss. They did not need the drone to be powerful. They needed it to be precise, and they needed it to be cheap enough that precision did not matter if the first one missed. There were others behind it. When your weapon costs $55,000 and you make 200 a day, you can afford to miss. Russia cannot afford to be hit. This is where I want to be careful, because the most dramatic version of this story runs ahead of the evidence. The claim that the drone surgically destroyed the fire control system specifically as opposed to the bridge generally traces mostly to a couple of open-source analysts and brief mentions in outlets like Militanii. The satellite imagery confirms the superstructure was wrecked. It does not on its own confirm which black box inside it died first. So treat the precise mechanism as strong inference, not gospel. What is certain is the pattern. Russia keeps reporting these vessels as damaged, not sunk. Ukraine keeps hitting them up high, the brain, not the belly, again and again across 4 ships in a single month. And step back to see the larger trap, because this is the part that should keep Russian planners awake. The convention that was supposed to keep the Caspian safe was built to stop a navy. It said nothing about a drone because in 2018, no one imagined a $55,000 wooden aircraft flying 1,000 kilometers to gut a warship. The fortress Russia built to lock the West out had no roof. The walls were legal and they were geographic, and a low, slow drone simply flew over both. The very thing that made the Caspian feel safe, the absence of any enemy ship, turned out to be meaningless against an enemy that did not need a ship at all. Which brings us to the question that actually decides what happens next. Not can Ukraine sink the Caspian flotilla. It probably cannot, and it does not need to. The real question is what this forces Russia to do with everything else. Lay out the scenarios. 1. Russia treats the Caspian strikes as a nuisance, absorbs the damage, and changes nothing. 2. Russia pulls its surviving Karakurts out of the Caspian, entirely retreating them through the inland canal system to safer waters. 3. Russia decides the Caspian is worth defending and moves to protect it. Here is where I place my bet, and here is the reasoning. Russia cannot easily choose option 1 because every damaged Corvette is a Kaliber platform that stops firing at Ukrainian cities, and that is a cost Moscow feels directly in fewer missiles landing where it wants them to land. It may partially choose option 2, sliding ships out the back door through the canals. But even that is not the escape it sounds like. Pull the Corvettes out and you have conceded the sea. You have admitted that a sea you wrote international law to control can no longer hold your own warships. And it solves nothing about the targets that cannot move. The base, the shipyards, and above all the Iranian cargo route, the one hauling Shahed drones and artillery shells up from the south to feed the Russian war machine, none of that can sail away. Those are fixed. They sit on the western Caspian shore, and they have to be defended in place. Withdrawing the ships just leaves the artery exposed, so the most likely path runs through option 3, and it carries a price that has nothing to do with the Caspian at all. To protect a coastline that stretches for thousands of kilometers, Russia has to put air defense there. The S-400 and Panzer systems that can reliably catch a low, slow drone are not infinite. There is only so much of it, and it is already stretched thin across a front that runs the length of a country. Every battery that moves east to guard Kaspiysk and Astrakhan and Makhachkala is a battery that is no longer over a refinery or a frontline command post or a city Ukraine wants to reach. The genius of a $55,000 drone is not the ship it damages. It is the multi-million-dollar defense it drags out of position somewhere else. That is the trade Ukraine is really buying, and it costs them almost nothing. And Russia is already feeling that strain elsewhere. Across 2026, Ukrainian long-range strikes have hammered Russian oil refineries from Perm to Novorossiysk, with Kyiv claiming billions of dollars in damage to the energy sector that funds the war. Cities have cancelled Victory Day parades out of fear of what might fly overhead. Every one of those targets is something that also wants an S-400 over it. The air defense network was already a blanket too small for the bed. Now the Caspian is pulling on one more corner of it. There is no version of this where Russia covers everything. Each new place Ukraine forces it to defend is a place that leaves somewhere else uncovered, and Ukraine gets to choose where it pushes next. That is the call. Russia will be pushed to thin its air defense, redistributing it toward the Caspian to plug a hole it never thought it would have to plug and weakening itself somewhere it would rather stay strong. And here is the condition that would prove me wrong, because a prediction without an exit is just a wish. If the Caspian strikes simply stop after May with no follow-on attacks, then there is no sustained pressure and no forced redeployment, and this was a headline, not a turning point. Or if Russia quietly withdraws its corvettes through the canals and leaves its air defenses exactly where they are, then the lesson was only that the ships moved, not that the map changed. Watch for the redeployment. If the brain-killing works as strategy and not just tactics, you will see Russian air defense density around the Caspian ports climb in the satellite record over the coming months. That is the tell, that is the number to watch. For 3 years, the Caspian was the room where Russia kept the lights off, certain no one was watching, certain the law and the distance would hold. A wooden drone turned the lights on. The Corvette is still floating today. That was never the point. The point was that the modern warship, the cruise missile platform, the pride of a flotilla that thought distance was the same thing as safety, can be taken off the board by something a film set scout and a concrete contractor started building in a workshop with a dozen people. Not by sinking it, by blinding it. And the fortress that Russia built with treaties and geography turned out to have no answer for the one weapon no treaty had ever named. The walls were real, the roof was never there. It just took a war for anyone to look up and notice. If I am right, the next chapter does not get written on the Caspian at all. It gets written wherever the air defense leaves from to go protect it. A thinner sky over a refinery, a quieter battery over a front line, an opening somewhere no one is looking yet. Keep your eye on where Russia's S-400s move next. That is where this story goes. If this is the kind of analysis you want, the kind that follows the mechanism, and not just the explosion, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next move is already in motion, and we will be watching for it. I will see you in the next one.